Hey everyone, we are super excited to be spreading awareness and destigmatizing mental health in the Black and Brown communities.
This podcast is a safe place for us to discuss our adversities and even our shortcomings. We all have a story.
Just remember, no matter what we go through, our story goes on. Hi everyone, welcome to Our Story Goes On. I am so happy to be here with you guys today, and we are on episode 9. So I am so happy to be talking on today's topic because it is a very important one. So before we get into the topic, though, we'll do a little bit of a check-in all by my lonesome. But today I am feeling pretty good. I can't really complain about too much right now. And I am actually pretty grateful that I've been able to accept a new job. And it's bittersweet because of the place that I'm at right now and having to let go of one place to move on to another. And the job that I'm at right now was kind of short-lived, and that's for reasons that I'm not really going to get into. But it was a great place to work. It wasn't anything like any kind of like drama or anything like that. But sometimes you have to think about certain things and what works best for you and your family. And that's kind of what I had to do. So I will be starting that job in a couple of weeks, and I'm excited to kind of start anew, and I think that new opportunities always mean new beginnings and everything. And it's good to kind of start that way, and so I'm excited for that. But other than that, everything else is going pretty well. I am still by myself. So Joe should really be joining us very, very soon. Not by next episode, but she will be with us very soon, and I cannot wait to have her back with us. I'm holding it down for the both of us, but it gets lonely with just me. So I'm super excited for her to come back and everything. So I appreciate you guys for still listening and giving us all the feedback, even though it's just been me. I really do appreciate it. I'm very grateful. All right, so let's get right into it. So we are currently in the month of September, which is the National Suicide Prevention Month. And I wanted to make a whole episode on the topic of suicide because of its importance and to help break the stigma behind it and to discuss what is normally a taboo topic to discuss. So before we get into anything else regarding suicide, I want to make sure that if you or someone you know is struggling, help is available. So after years and years of advocacy and hard work, 988 is now available nationwide as the new number to contact for any kind of mental health crisis, substance use issues, and of course, suicide crisis. So you can just dial that number and it will take you to a 24/7 hour hotline and be able to provide you with help, be able to hopefully gear you in the right direction with whatever it is that you may be struggling with. And it's just a way for people to quickly connect with support during a crisis. And like I said, it is 24/7. And so that is 988. And it's so when I found out that that was now the new way to get in contact with a crisis counselor or a crisis person, it just made me feel very grateful for the advocacy that people are doing behind the scenes, And I know this was like years in the making, and it's just so incredible now that we can have that number at our fingertips, the same way that we have 911. And I know some people might be thinking, well, if there is kind of a crisis, like usually people call 911, but now this is a little bit different because it is able to be specific towards a mental health crisis, substance use, and of course suicide as well. So please, if you or anyone else is struggling, that's a great tool to use, and just know that you're not alone. Okay? So suicide affects all ages and groups. It does not discriminate, and It's tragic, but it can be preventable. And knowing the warning signs can help save lives. So let's just talk about some fast facts about suicide first. So, suicide is the 12th leading cause of death in the United States as of, I believe that statistic is from 2020. Suicide is also the leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. So, if you think about that, from those ages, I mean, those are so many young people. And you're probably thinking about, like, wow, like 11, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 taking their own lives, feeling that in so much pain, to be able to feel like I don't want to live anymore. And knowing these kind of facts is what starts the steps to prevent suicide. Another fact is that 79% of all people who die by suicide are male. And the fact about that, though, is because I hear a lot of people talk about how males are the ones who commit or who try to take their own lives more than females. And there's also the, like, just to kind of piggyback off that statistic, is that more women than men attempt suicide. Men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. So women tend to attempt it more, but it seems like men are just more likely to die by suicide. And people have talked and discussed about this as well in terms of why that may be. And, I've heard different reasons. And I know that one specific thing I've heard is that men will probably use more means to go through with it in that sense, I guess. And, there's really no one way or in terms of statistics, I mean. So now another fact is that Asian/Native Hawaiian or other specific islander and Black individuals had the lowest prevalence of suicide attempts, while Alaska Native/American Indian and white individuals had the highest prevalence. So that's, again, these are just statistics. These are fast facts about suicide. And when you kind of know these facts, it kind of allows the conversation to be had a little bit more and just, be able to have more of that knowledge in a sense. So what I want to include right now as well too, in terms of the breaking the stigma in suicide and talking about it, is that a lot of people, most people, still use the terms committing suicide. So he/she committed suicide, they committed suicide. And so it's actually best to try your very best to change that verbiage a little bit to actually dying by suicide. And the reason for that is because when you're saying that a person has committed suicide, it kind of makes it sound very negative. And I know that suicide is not a positive thing. I'm not saying that. It's just more about understanding that when a person decides to take their own life, it's not like they've committed a crime. Because that's what we talk about when people commit a crime, right? Commit murder, commit whatever else comes to mind. Like, that word commit is just so strong. And so when we talk about other things, like when a person dies by other means, we usually use the word die, right? So it's kind of that same concept. A person died by suicide. And I just wanted to include that little fact because I think it's super important to educate yourself in what the more proper way or the more less stigmatized way to speak about suicide. So that's just one indication of it. All right. So let's talk about some warning signs. So there is kind of a difference between warning signs of suicide when it comes to the immediate risk, and then more of like a person might want to, or a person might be thinking about wanting to take their own life. So what I mean by immediate risk is that the person is probably having a plan or intent to want to hurt or kill themselves. So immediate risk, a couple of the warning signs would be talking about wanting to die or wanting to kill themselves, talking about feeling empty or hopeless or having no reason to live. So hopelessness is a sign of suicidal thinking or depression as well. Hopelessness is a sign of depression, but hopelessness is a little bit more intense because you don't have any more hope. You don't feel like there's anything to look forward to. You don't necessarily feel attached to a person, persons, things in your life. That's what hopelessness is, and that's why it's a sign of immediate risk. Another sign would be withdrawing from family and friends. Another one would be giving away important possessions, saying goodbye to friends and family, and putting affairs in order, such as like making a will or writing a letter. So, those are just some signs of immediate risk to a person who may be wanting to hurt or kill themselves. Now, a warning sign for more of like the thought of wanting to or possibly having a suicide attempt would be displaying extreme mood swings, suddenly changing from like very sad to very calm or happy, making a plan or looking for ways to kill themselves, such as searching for methods, right? Stockpiling pills, buying a gun. Those are just a couple of examples. Another example of warning signs for a suicide attempt would be talking about or feeling a lot of guilt or shame. And that could come from a place of whatever it is that that person might be going through, or maybe something that they feel are not comfortable with the way that they're feeling, right? Because unfortunately, many people who do experience mental health symptoms or conditions, guilt and shame do come with that a lot, right? Because a lot of people will feel guilty of maybe even feeling depressed, or other people might be making that person feel guilty, and that's not okay at all. But a lot of that does come with the guilt and shame of it, of course. Another warning sign of this would be using alcohol or drugs a lot more often, right? And we're not talking about like socially, but we're talking about noticing an increase of dependency on those kind of substances. Another warning sign will be acting anxious or agitated, changes in your appetite or sleep, and then any kind of irritability or rage could also be a sign of a suicide attempt. So it's important to also note that there is no single cause of suicide, though. Okay. There's not one single event or circumstance that leads people to die by suicide, but it is caused by some risk factors, of course, right? Just like everything else is. And it's important to remember as well that suicide doesn't just happen like that. So these warning signs are there for a reason. They're called warning signs because they are to give warning to people and what to look out for in their loved ones. And it's very rare that a person will just decide that without showing these kind of signs. So, risk factors, right, don't cause or predict a suicide, but more of an indicator of who may consider, attempt, or die by suicide. Okay, so some risk factors are a depression diagnosis or other mental health disorders, chronic pain, a history of other suicide attempts, history of trauma or abuse, stressful life events, right? So if a person is going through like a financial loss, or maybe has now been fired or laid off from a job, perhaps they're going through a grieving process, some kind of stressful life event that has now caused their life to change, right? That's a risk factor as well. And then any kind of lack of social support is also a risk factor, because when one is experiencing mental health symptoms, a lot of times we need those people to lean on, right? We need our friends in those times. We need our family members in those times. And if you are going through something, or you feel like you're going through something and you're alone in that, right? That is also a risk factor, because that also increases the likelihood of feeling hopeless as well, because you feel, hey, who's here for me, right? And that's why, of course, it's also important to make sure that you know who is there for you, because you're not alone in that. Even if you might not feel comfortable in talking with maybe a friend or family member about how you're feeling, because it is very difficult to talk about these certain things, it's still important to remember, though, that there is help, like I had mentioned before, with the new number 988, and the resources of the National Suicide Hotline. all those different things, they're there to help you. And so the social support comes in terms of friends and family, but it's also important to remember that there is someone there to speak with you through these kind of resources too. So now, of course, with these risk factors, right? It's not like everyone who has these risk factors will try to attempt suicide. And it's actually kind of difficult to tell who will actually act on these suicidal thoughts. So, risk factors are important to keep in mind. But it's just important to remember that these risk factors don't equal suicide either. And just like the warning signs, like I had mentioned before, it really is kind of more about that, like what to look out for, right? And especially if you are a parent with an adolescent, like I mentioned with that statistic of 10 to 34, right? It's important to kind of look out for these things. And I'm not a parent, so I don't necessarily know what it feels like to possibly have that stress or that anxiety that your son or daughter might be going through something like that. But that's why, like I mentioned before, suicide is preventable, because if you're looking for these warning signs, hey, let's try to get so and so some help maybe, or show that you are there for them through it all as well. So, now of course, if you ever feel like you are having any of these issues, right, where you have experienced suicidal thinking or anything like that, there are definitely some treatments and therapies that are able to help you, of course. So, one like brief intervention, which I've also used in my experience as a therapist, is safety planning, or a no harm contract, is what it's called sometimes. So, clients will work with a therapist to develop a plan that describes ways to limit access to certain things that might be a trigger for a person who might have suicidal thinking, such as firearms, pills, poisons, sharp objects, right? And this plan also lists coping strategies and people and resources that could help in a crisis. So I have used this in my work as well. And I've used it primarily more with my adolescents than with my adult clients, because I feel like with adolescents, they have a little bit more, it's like with the safety planning. I feel like some adults will sit there and think like, I don't need that, or like it's just, I guess it's just more about having them understand why that safety plan is put in place. So I have worked with several clients that have been suicidal, and thank goodness I've never had one of my clients attempt or die by suicide, but I have worked with clients who have active suicidal ideation or passive suicidal ideation. And when they do come into my office, and if they do express those kind of thinking, and it's something they've mentioned more than once, then that's where the safety plan will come into play. And of course, if we evaluate and assess them in the moment and we feel that they are, of course, at immediate risk, then that's a whole different story. Then we'll different measures are put in place for that. But the safety planning is a brief intervention so that it's like, hey, you and I have an understanding. Here are the coping strategies you can use in the time of crisis. Here is who you can call in the time of crisis. And this is ways that we can limit those triggers that you might have. And so it's literally a piece of paper, and we do it together, and I give it to the client, make a copy for the parent, or if I'm working with an adult, we do it together, give them a copy. And that way it's there in front of them. They can refer to it if they're at home and they feel like they're having a difficult time. And so it's not an end all be all, of course. It's not like, oh, well, this is the only thing and then that's it. Poof, everything is fine. But it's a brief intervention, right? And that's something that could help in the moment, and that could help while you're in a session with someone. And of course, if you're not a therapist, perhaps you can still do this with your child, with a friend, right? There's no harm in that at all. It's just about listing, hey, here's the resources. Like I said, 988. Perhaps if that person does have a therapist, the therapist name and number. A family member or friend that is local. Let's say the person lives by themselves, things like that. So that's something to look out for too, or to think about. Another form of therapy that can help is cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy. CBT is a form of therapy, and CBT allows a person to think differently about their thoughts. And that's one way to help as well. And so, and just in general, talk therapy. So, if you're seeing a therapist once a week or maybe once every other week, if you are having suicidal thinking, though, you would hope that you're seeing your therapist at least once a week, maybe even more. So, that's really important to think about. Like, so if you are having these thoughts, a therapist can help you in that too. I know how difficult it is sometimes to access therapy in this country in today's day and age, but consider that too. So I remember that we did a whole episode on how to reach out to a therapist or how to get help in that sense. And I know that we talked about, like, reaching out to your insurance company. So if you do have health insurance, that is one way to go about trying to find a therapist. And if you don't, Psychology Today is a really good resource. And, it's just like, if you Google Psychology Today, find a therapist, it'll be the first thing that will pop up. It might even be the first thing that actually pops up without you even Googling find a therapist. You just put your zip code in, and whoever decides to put their name out there on Psychology Today, you can find a therapist through that. And it'll give you the description of what they do, where they're located, what insurance they take, what insurance they don't take. So it's a really great source. And, you'll be surprised of how therapists will work with you in terms of what you can afford and what you can't if you don't have health insurance. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I also think what's really important is if I do have a client that is, I think this is important whether a client is suicidal or not, is having collaborative care. So what that means is that I will have, with the consent of the client and or the client's parent / guardian, collaborative care basically means that I am speaking with the client's doctor, the client's prescriber, right? Perhaps if it's an adolescent or a child, I have access to the guidance counselor at school. So that's all collaborative care. It's basically a treatment team. We all come together, we collaborate, we discuss the client. Again, this is all within the consent of the client or the client's parent / guardian. And that way we can all be on the same page. We all know what to look out for, what we're working on, right? What are some coping skills that we've talked about? What are some things that we've noticed helps and what doesn't help? So that's really something to look out for as well, and to think about if you know a friend or if you have a child and you're thinking, what is another good way to make sure that everyone is on the same page to help prevent suicide. The other thing I wanted to mention as well, because I think a lot of people get confused on suicide discussion. So, and this is like how to go into the prevention aspect of it. Discussing suicide with a person does not increase their chances of actually trying to die by suicide. And that's super important to remember. I think a lot of times parents, family, friends get very nervous or anxious to talk to their loved one about suicide because they think, well, if I talk to them about it, are they going to do it? And it's an understandable thought process, but it does not increase their chance to do it. So think about that before you might have that in your head about like, oh, well, I don't want to ask them, or I don't want to talk about it with them because what happens if I put it in their brain? That means that they're now going to do it. It's actually doesn't. It actually helps to talk about it more than people think. So keep that in mind before you maybe want to think about talking about it. It actually helps to talk about it. And that's the first thing I was going to say about how to prevent suicide is to talk about it. Look up ways to help in your community about it. Talk about it with people who may have struggled with it. Get psychoeducate yourself in that sense too. And again, when I mentioned about like learn about like what maybe is going on in your community, there's always walks with it, right? Researching it is also a great way to prevent it, because the more that you know, the more that you're able to prevent it. And again, like I mentioned before, learning about the warning signs. that's really important, because if you are able to look out for these warning signs, then you kind of know what to look out for in that sense, right? So this is all about ways to prevent it from actually happening. Okay. And that's super important because I think a lot of times, again, people just assume that they're not very much able to prevent suicide, but it is. So, yeah, so that's basically all of the things that I wanted to talk to today for Suicide Prevention Month. And it's just so important to break the stigma with mental health. It's a topic that I am so passionate about, and I just wish that more of us would be passionate about it. And I think we're getting better as a society, and I'm noticing more people talk about it, but we still have a long way to go. So I hope that this episode has reached someone or has been able to teach you guys a little bit as well too about suicide prevention. Okay, so the affirmation for today, I've been really slacking on the affirmations. But I mean, it's going to be very typical for today, but the affirmation is you are not alone. Again, the line that you can reach is 988. Dial that, and it's a 24/7 crisis line for mental health crisis or problems, substance use, and of course, like I mentioned, suicide. Okay. I hope everyone is well. I hope you all take care of yourself, and we will see you for next episode. Thank you.